Good morning. Welcome. Welcome. And I think we'll get started here. I just want to say, good morning. I'm Diana Clark, and I don't know, I just feel so happy to be here with all of you, including my good friends and co-teachers, Kim, Ying, and David. It's such a pleasure to be sharing what for us has turned out to be like so much fun and interesting to just poke around in the suttas and to play around in there. And in order to help kind of you like help have your own relationship with the suttas, we're offering this course to kind of share what we've learned through the years. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ying.
Yeah, I'll extend my warm welcome as well. So this is our kind of fourth time, third, doing the Pali Canon introductory course. And we're still very happy as we were gathering and preparing for the course. And so we hope that, there is some energy that we are transmitting from this enthusiasm and curiosity that we have, and so evoke some curiosity in you about this beautiful body of work that we're going to explore a bit. And so be happy seeing you, and I'm going to pass on to David.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Yeah, gosh, what to add? I think maybe we've already sort of expressed it. For us, this began as a sort of shared enjoyment of how to bring some of these ancient and sometimes difficult to access texts and teachings into our practices. And we eventually wanted to share that with others. And so I would say one of the objectives here, we'll talk at greater length about objectives, is just to demystify a little bit this body of text so that it can be of use to you too in your practice. And instead of being sort of this opaque, kind of oddly expressed way of sharing the teachings, that it can be something that actually you can work even into your meditation practice as well as your understanding of the Dharma. So welcome, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit in yet one more voice, expressing the same appreciation as the others for our teaching team and the joy we've had in putting together this course for you, and also in exploring the text ourselves. I think maybe the little inspiration coming to mind at this moment is to say that the texts, riff on what David said, is that the texts are an important part of our practice. So it's neither that we should just totally ignore them. It's like, oh, that's not relevant. It's some ancient thing from some other part of the world. And, the intellect's not supposed to be used in practice anyway. It's all about, other kinds of things. But there's actually something here to be learned. I think it shouldn't be no part of our practice. And yet, it's also not the only thing. We're not enslaved to these books, and it's something that is contained in written words. So finding that relationship where it's a dynamic and useful and beneficial part of our practice has very much to do with this relationship that Diana mentioned. How do we relate to these such that they are relating? And we hope to convey that through our own experience. So thank you. Looking forward to this. Back to Ying.
So maybe I will continue with what all of us just shared to offer a little bit of a kind of an overview of this course and the 3 sessions that we'll be going through, and to share a little bit about the bigger picture of how we go about sharing the Pali Canon, how we practice it, how we relate to it. I think the word "goes" may not necessarily completely capture what I'm about to say, but it's a really a kind of overarching orientation. And so you have a sense of getting yourself oriented in this course in some way. And so the way we organized this course in the next 3 sessions, we're hoping to share or reflect in several different ways. The first one, and that's related to what Kim, David, and Diana were saying, is to convey in some way that this Pali Canon text, studying, practicing with it, is a relevant part of our practice path. And for those of you who are here, there must be some curiosity about it. And so you may have heard about it, you may have learned a little. And so it brought you here, something stirs you inside. And so we wanted to offer some perspective to validate, yes, we wanted to let you know, yes, this is a relevant part of the practicing. And as such, we wanted to offer some perspectives in terms of a bigger context. And so in this course, we will share a little bit about the overarching structure of the Pali Canon text, how it's organized, share a little bit about the history and how the texts are transmitted over thousands of years now, and how they're preserved, and the language that's being involved in this, different languages now all the way till what we're using often today. And for me, whenever I kind of touch into this broader context, it has certain kind of effect for me. Some part of me feel like I'm joining a practice and learning stream that came down kind of thousands of years ago. And so it touches me in very meaningful ways. And I had hoped that, all of you had a chance to kind of have this kind of a broader perspective. And maybe this will have some kind of impact on you, and maybe have some implications for you. I know I didn't start this way. I kind of just dived in, and I think each of us might have started in something like that and didn't have a broader picture. And the broader picture did offer something quite meaningful. And we will also share a little bit about how people practiced in the past. Maybe they're conveyed through the text in terms of stories, the culture, the overall context of where how the text comes, how the teachings came forth. And this helps us to learn how we might relate to this text, given our own individual history, culture, environment we're in, and social environment we're in, and then learn how to relate to them in some meaningful way. And then the other aspect of this course that we'd like to share, besides offering the overarching picture, is over the last few decades, there have been a lot of tools, utilities, other supports that are developed for exploring this text. And so we want to offer some practical skills in studying the text and navigating the text, to search for the text. Those things did not exist a few decades ago when we started. And so it's been so helpful to this day as those of us who are interested in learning about it. And so you hear us bring in some of these tools in as part of exploration. And so tools like Sutta Central, some of you would know this, that incorporated so many different translations in one website, and that itself contained so much, so many gems there, and the different Pali Canon, Pali dictionaries that are made available, and then so we'll share some of those, and also practical ways to navigate through those tools, and we'll share some lessons learned, some practical tips in utilizing those. And then the third aspect of this course is a very important dimension of exploring the Pali Canon text. That is, explore our relationship with the text. I think Diana and Kim and David all mentioned to some degree how we relate to the text have an important impact on our practice. And I'll name just a few possibilities, but we will be offering more as the course unfolds in terms of exploring our own relationship, and maybe over time, over the course of these 3 sessions or over the years. And the first one is pretty simple, and in a very humanly way, relating to the text, in that we are multidimensional beings, and that the text are quite multidimensional. And they are words that convey certain things in terms of meanings, in cognitive way, emotions. They may also be the kind of a text that serving as pointers to some things that are beyond concepts and ideas. And so this exploring the relationship with the text, our invitation is to not to flatten it out. Consider it almost like a living being or living stream, where all of this have a multidimensional aspect to it. Another possibility in terms of relating to the text is holding them as possible inspirations, aspirations, and possibilities. They are pointers for something that may be not immediately connecting, and they may even have things that sort of contradictory to each other. Can we have space to hold those? And maybe the last thing I'll say is in relating to this text, I spoke about how the ways that the text may be transmitted from different culture conditioning, from the different environments, all the way to today in this generational way. One of the ways, and not the only way, that relates to this text is to be the friends of past and the present and maybe even future. And so some of these teachings are serving as kind of a guidance of the practice, and some are serving as understandings of the text, of the teachings. And let yourself kind of befriend the text in some way that transmitted from the past all the way to today. And then the last aspect I'll share in terms of relating our relationship with the text, relating to this course, is that we are going to share some various ways of how we practice with the text, how we enliven them in our own practice, in our own path. And the invitation is to have a curious beginner's mind and don't know mind. I think for four of us, each of us probably have kind of swam in this text for a few decades, and yet we continue to discover and then be inspired and enlivened by the text on an ongoing basis. And so this is the practice coming alive. And so we will share some different ways of practicing with it, and the invitation is maybe avoid the sense of I'm going to get it. This is it. Maybe it's a sense of a discovery and exploration. I think that's all I have. Maybe those are the orientations for the course. And just to recap, we'll offer some overarching structure, history, transmission aspect of the Pali Canon. We'll offer some practical navigation skills, how to study the text using some different tools. Offer some pointers on how we relate to text, and then finally, how to practice with the text. So with that, I am going to pass on to is it Diana? Yes, Diana.
Thank you, Ying, for that beautiful introduction. It makes me feel like, oh, I want to take this class. Yeah, I have to say that the four of us, this is, we kind of, we became such good friends starting with, because we all shared this love of the text, and just noticing how just a role it's had in our lives and how that role has been shifting and changing. So now I would like an opportunity for you to consider, after having heard an introduction by Ying, to share, like, what would you like to get from this class? What would you like to gain some greater understanding or be inspired by? Or do you have some burning questions about the Pali Canon? Is there something in particular why you signed up for this course? So we're going to put you into some breakout groups, and you'll be in a group of 3 to 4, and you'll have about 12 minutes total to talk about this. And the way that we would like to do this is, sometimes we call this like the soup making method, where one person puts an ingredient into the soup bowl, and then the second person puts an ingredient, then the third person puts an ingredient, and then it comes back around, and the first person, now having heard the other two people, might have a new idea or something to add, and then they might add an ingredient, like, oh yeah, I think it would be nice to do this or as well. And then this way, just we're adding ingredients to the soup, so to speak. And so an example of an ingredient is, I'd like to learn how to better navigate the suttas. I don't know how to find my way through them, or, and so it would just be like a simple sentence. It's not a big long story, because we don't have time for the long stories, but just some thing that you would like to get out of this class. I feel kind of funny saying get out of this class. Something that I don't know, can't think of better language at this moment, but something that maybe what inspired you to sign up for this, what would make your heart sing if you kind of left this class like, oh yeah, okay, I didn't even know that I wanted that necessarily, but now that I think about it, it would be great. So Again, you'll have 12 minutes total in the group. There will be a clock on the Zoom, so just keep an eye on the clock.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Good to see you. Hope that was enjoyable, just to kind of get to know one another. One of the things that we've found with all the classes we teach is just how sweet it is to find others who enjoy doing this kind of practice together, and particularly bringing some sort of study aspect into the practice. So that's just the first opportunity to get to know one another. And then as we go forward over the next couple of days, we'll have additional breakout groups to just keep touching back into this community of practice that we create. So yeah, we're curious what comes up in the groups. We like to know the burning questions, if there are any, and people's aspirations for coming to the class, and any questions that come up that we might be able to address before we head into another teaching. So feel free to raise your Zoom hand, let me think how many people we have. You could probably wave around a real hand if your Zoom hand you can't find it. But yeah, let us know how things went, what came up, any questions, and any burning questions that you have about things you'd like to, as Diana put it, get out of the class. She couldn't avoid that expression. Funny how our language pins us in. But yeah, anything that you'd like to find in the class, that you seek in the class. Maria. Yeah, unmute and yeah.
So I have something which I know I can say in the safety of a Dharma group. I definitely am here for Kalyana Mittas, and I have a lot of access to monastics. But what I'd like is inspiration from others. If I have a handful of sutras, certainly including Right View, to uplift, and maybe 2 stories, but I want to have a handful to not be cerebral, to not focus too much on study. That's one of my defilements, actually, is to go into my head. But others who have study, if you have a gem or 2, I don't need the better to be the enemy of the good. I listen to Right View on Pali Radio all the time, and so I'm fairly ignorant of how to bring it to my heart, and off the cushion, not in samadhi, in meditation. So that's what I'm hoping for, is to walk away with a few gems. And sadly, I'm going to a Sala Puja at Abhayagiri on Saturday, and I can't get there without missing this. So I'm hoping also that there's a recording, and that if anyone wants to message me on my phone and be a Kalyana Mitta, I'm in Oakland, and we do have a sitting group and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, several nice points there. We were going to tell everybody the list that you must have on Saturday, so too bad that you won't be. No, I'm kidding. What we'll do instead is show everyone, I think, a little bit about how to find their way, each of your ways, to suttas that speak to you, discourses that support your practice, and that possibly are ones also to share. So anyway. We'll keep doing that, and we'll come across, I think, quite a few gems along the way. And Ying, Kim, Diana, you want to add anything? My Kalyana Mitta. This is a word or a phrase that others may or may not recognize. Kalyana Mitta is a Pali set of words that mean spiritual friends or companions in the path, or companions in the Dharma. And in a sense, that's what we create here with these classes, and that also we find in other ways in our practice. And the practice is rich when it's practiced with others, and so we celebrate that. Any other thoughts from other colleagues? Ying, did you unmute? No. Okay, that's.
Yeah, I can just say, yeah, the Kalyana Mitta is so important in exploring the text. So, I think Diana mentioned the 4 of us found each other, and, we loved exploring this together. And so that's just a wonderful intention, and I do hope in some way that you find folks that Kalyana Mitta to kind of do this together. Yeah, that's great.
And one thing that I thought of to add too is, in a sense, probably most of us. Thanks, Diana, for responding to that chat. Feel free to drop a question into the chat too if you'd like. But one aspect of what was I going to say? I may have lost my train of thought there. Something that Maria asked. Just that we gather in part, this little group here, in part because our intellectual capacity is part of what we bring to practice. And the four of us really celebrate that. And there's substantial textual support for this aspect of practice too. In our practice, the mind, even thinking, are not enemies, not something we need to get rid of to awaken, but rather capacities that we particularly seek to strengthen, those that have atrophied or not been very well developed. And but there's no conflict or no inherent conflict between a good practice, a sufficient practice, and the exploration of the text and formal study. I saw Diana nodding her head. This goes back in our group think. Any other questions? Maria, thank you for yours. Any other questions, observations, reflections, burning questions that came up in the breakout groups, or that you bring with you to our meeting? Oh, Leslie, great. And Anne. Okay, it's first Leslie and then Anne. It took me a second to see your hands. Leslie, come ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say quickly, this is, for me, a wonderfully living example of what I call living in both and land. The heart and the study brought together.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Again, no reason that study and the heart should find themselves at odds. Thank you for that. And Anne.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, yeah, you can? Good.
Yeah.
Okay. The first time I sat at retreat, it was in Zen, and I'd read about it and thought I was going to have an amazing experience, because I'd read these books. But actually, what happened was I understood very clearly for the first time that what I perceive around me, there's kind of a translucent shield that I produce, like my own thoughts, my own ideas, what's going on. I'm not really seeing what's going out there, or what someone's really saying, what their real intentions are. So that was a big thing. And that's continued to be a focus of my practice. And so I'm hoping that studying these suttas will help as well in that effort that I'm trying to make. Thank you.
Nice. I appreciate that. I think that it's possible that each of us brings to our practice that's a great example of sort of a burning question that comes from our own experience of practice.
Yeah.
And that we can look for sort of the text as sounding board, or the text as resource for exploring sort of arcane aspects maybe of our own practice.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you, Anne. So let me just ask again if there's any other question. If not, we'll proceed forward, but want to see if there's any other hand that I didn't previously see. I think we're good. So I'll hand off to Kim.
Great, thank you. So I have the joyful task of introducing us to the structure of the Pali Canon. Like, what is this group of texts that we're talking about? How is it organized? Someone once told me that he was curious about learning more about the early texts, but that he was a little bit daunted by all those big books. That was his actual words. And I thought, yeah, okay, fair enough. So let's meet these big books. Sometimes things that seem intimidating at first become less so when we get to meet them in a friendly way. So I want to start us actually by reading a few verses that come from a very popular one of the texts of the Pali Canon. And I'd like to suggest that you listen to it in a certain way. So we've already heard several different angles on the idea that it's not only about our head. So maybe as I read these, listen with your heart, with your body, as well as with your mind. And just see, not really tense, but in a very just a present way, as if the words are important for your well-being and are worth remembering. And maybe as if they're being spoken freshly in this moment. Irrigators guide water. Fletchers shape arrows. Carpenters fashion wood. Sages tame themselves. As a solid mass of rock is not moved by the wind, so a sage is unmoved by praise or blame. As a deep lake is clear and undisturbed, so a sage becomes clear upon hearing the Dharma. So where does this come from? This is from a collection of verses called the Dhammapada, which is much loved in Asia, often one of the first books that people read. And here in the West, we also have quite a number of translations of it. And how was it to listen to it freshly and really take it in? Was it different than just reading those words as if you were reading a magazine in a waiting room? So the Pali Canon is a treasure trove of wisdom teachings of a similar style as the one that I just read. And we'll talk more about the history and the transmission of these texts later. My aim right now is to orient you to kind of the whole of the Pali Canon. What is this body of teachings? So, just to give you the definition, the Pali Canon is a collection of sacred literature that was originally put together as oral texts. Over time, these were preserved by people reciting them, and then eventually they were written down in the language of Pali, which is an ancient Indian language. That's possibly not the language that the Buddha spoke himself, but this is the language that these original texts have been preserved in, or this version of the early text has been preserved in. And we'll talk a little bit more about Pali later. And these texts record teachings that were given by the Buddha and a number of his major disciples. And they include spoken discourses like sermons, as well as verses, poems, stories, analyses, and the rules for monastic living. So it includes a lot of different aspects, and they're written in very different styles. I hope throughout this course we'll get to hear some prose, some poetry, some different, very dry teachings, very moist teachings. There's so many different ways that these texts are conveyed. And my understanding of that is it's because the Buddha could teach people with any kind of mind. And so he offered so many different ways in, different analogies and ways of connecting with them. So just so you see it once, I'm going to share my screen with a kind of a list of all the books of the Pali Canon, and then we'll actually, I'll say a little bit more about each one. But this is, there it is. Can you see that? Yeah, okay, great. So the Pali Canon is also called the three baskets, the tipitaka. You may have heard that term. T is three, pitaka, basket. So the three baskets, you can only see two of them on this list so far, but we'll get to them. The first one is the collection of teachings around the code of discipline for monastics, for monks and nuns. And this is the Vinaya Pitaka. The second basket is the basket of the teachings, the Sutta Pitaka, which is listed here. And there are 5 major books, major collections, let's say, and we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. This last one, the small group, has a whole bunch of smaller texts in it. So it's not exactly one book. No one has ever put them all into one book because it would actually be the biggest book then. But anyway, these are the things that you hear quoted in Dharma talks, the suttas, and they're mostly discourses spoken by the Buddha. That means a thread, or a thread of the teachings. And then the third basket, on the next page here, is the Abhidhamma, the basket of the higher teaching. That's the literal translation of Abhidhamma. And it's kind of an analysis, a deeper analysis of how the mind works. And it consists of 7 books. It's definitely later than the other 2 baskets, but still early enough that it's part of the Pali Canon. It's not as late as commentaries on these texts, for example. So these are the 3 baskets. We're going to go back and focus in on the Sutta Pitaka, the one that most of us have heard about through Dharma teachings, Dharma talks, etc. In the later sections, we might mention some of those other texts also. But these 5 collections, each one is called a Nikaya, which kind of means collection, and each has its own character and organizational method. So I want to share about each of the major books of the Sutta Pitaka. Okay, so I'm going to do that I love this part. I get to hold them up. They're actual books in our modern world, even though they're also online. So I'm going to be really geeky and hold them all up, and then I'm going to correct myself in a later session about how important the actual, I'm not, thumping books, but I'll correct myself later about getting too excited about books. And as somebody mentioned in the chat, whether or not we'll share that list, yes, we will. You'll get that after this class. So starting with the first one that was listed there was the Digha Nikaya. That's this. The Long Discourses of the Buddha, a translation of the Digha Nikaya, it says here. And this is called the Long Discourses. Probably that refers to the length of the suttas that are in it. They're pretty long, most of them. And they tend to be kind of story-like. And they have a function. Why were these ones collected? Not actually just because they're all the long ones collected together. It's because they mostly share about the teaching of the Buddha relative to the other spiritual teachings at his time. They position the Buddha's teachings compared to, say, the teachings of the Brahmins, the hereditary religious class, and to other wandering ascetics. There were other ones besides the Buddha at that time. So it's also considered the first book of the Pali Canon. The Nikayas do have an order to them. Digha Nikaya is first. So it tells a lot about kind of the Buddha's teachings relative to other teachings, and it has a lot in there. There's a lot of Dharma in there too, but you have to understand this somewhat propaganda-like aspect of it, and a celebration of the Buddha, and also about how to continue the teachings after the Buddha dies. There's a fair amount in there about that. Second text, second Nikaya, is this one, the middle-length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya. And this book is really kind of considered a manual for new monastics, but we could consider ourselves new monastics also. It's very approachable. This is often the one that people start with if they go to one of the main Nikayas. I would recommend starting with these. A lot of them are stories, so they're very relatable. They have characters that we can appreciate even in the modern world. Some of them are kind of funny, and it really contains an overview of all the major topics and themes and teachings that the Buddha offered. It's really good. I mean, if you were to do only one of them, this would probably be enough. But it talks about everything from ethical conduct to meditation practices to some of the deeper teachings like karma, dependent origination, a lot about right effort and what is wisdom and concentration, what are the jhanas. So it has kind of a complete overview of the Buddha's doctrine, essentially. So I find it very handy and really, really valuable. Okay. Third book of the Pali Canon, third Nikaya, is the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses of the Buddha, also called the linked discourses on Sutta Central. So these are organized by topic. So these are a whole bunch of teachings about, for example, conditionality, a whole bunch of teachings about feeling tone, a whole bunch of teachings that the Buddha gave to devas. You know, there's like collections of teachings around certain topics, and they tend to be maybe a little bit specialized, or sometimes a little even obscure, but they're all collected together. So this is considered a collection for people who are more dedicated practitioners who are maybe interested in the teachings that will point them toward awakening. And Bhikkhu Bodhi has recently published a couple of books that are about kind of the structure of the Samyutta Nikaya. He sees in here a structure related to the Four Noble Truths, which I think is pretty interesting. So he's written, I think it's called Noble Path, Noble Truths, or Noble Truths, Noble Path. It's maybe the common one. And then there's also one about Pali, reading discourses in Pali that are based on the teachings of the Samyutta Nikaya. So also a very interesting text. Then the fourth of the Nikayas is this one, the numerical discourses, the Anguttara Nikaya. That literally means something like further factored or incrementing by one. These are hilarious because these are put together based on the number in a list. You know, Buddhism loves lists, right? So this has the book of the ones, the book of the twos, the book of the threes, and everything in the book of the threes is a list of three. And that's the organizing principle. And so it's very interesting to read this text because it's not, you get these kind of random doses of things that are in threes, you know, or in fours or in fives, and it goes all the way up, I think, to the 11s. So it's pretty interesting. I don't know, maybe it's for Dharma teachers. We always need a handy list to talk about in our talks, but it also has a lot of teachings in it that are for lay people. And there are teachings for lay people all throughout the discourses, but this one seems to have a lot where the Buddha was specifically directing it toward lay people. So some people find that an interesting place to start, but also remember that the lay people of that time were living pretty different lives than we are. So sometimes those are actually not as universal, I find. Okay, then we get to the Khuddaka Nikaya, right? That one that was at the end and it had all the other books listed under it. So it's called the small collection, but it would be the biggest if you put them all together. But it's a lot of small books. So here's the Dhammapada. This is what I read from, those 3 verses. Nice slim little book. This is Gil Fronsdal's translation. And this is some verses that the Buddha kind of put forth a lot of his teachings in these pithy little verses. It's a little hard to understand them if you don't know anything about the teachings, but if you do, they're really nice encapsulations of what he's offering. I'll just hold up a few others. The Sutta Nipata, there's now a bigger translation of it, but it has the commentary in with it, so it looks too daunting if I hold it up. So this Sutta Nipata is actually a small text, rather profound, one of the earliest ones. You may have heard of it. Ones you may not have heard of, Udana and Itivuddhaka. These are also some specialized kind of texts that were that I find these smaller ones tend to be very early, very profound condensations. And then some of you have heard of the Therigatha and the Theragatha, the poems of the elders. So these are the awakening poems of some of the original monks and nuns. Very beautiful. We actually did a course on that a few years ago. I think it's probably still on Audio Dharma. Maybe we'll do it again someday because they're so great. And then because I can't resist, the manual of the Abhidhamma. So this is that third basket. This is not part of the Sutta Pitaka, it's part of the Abhidhamma Pitaka. We don't have, this is only one kind of summary of the Abhidhamma, otherwise it would be really big. So anyway, that we do have availability of some of the teachings of the Abhidhamma. Okay. So as usual, I've gotten really excited about that, and now I have to reorient myself. So let's see. So recall the passage that I read at the beginning from the Dhammapada. These are, pithy teachings in bite-sized form that are conveying basically the essential teachings of the Dhamma. And they point toward the goal in subtle ways. So that's why I chose the 3 verses about the sage. And I think somebody asked if I could repeat them. I'm going to let David repeat them in the upcoming meditation that we're doing, and you'll get to experience them in a different way. So maybe I'll just conclude with the words. Again, this is becoming a theme already. How we relate to the teachings, the relationship that we develop to them is up to us. It's up to us in a certain sense, and we can find ways to relate to them that resonate with our own path. So we'll be talking about this more and more throughout. But I want to leave you with the fact that these were originally living, breathing teachings that were passed down orally. I mean, there were people whose job it was to remember certain texts and to recite them publicly so that other people would hear them and benefit from them. And it's like they were the embodiment of that section of the Digha Nikaya or whatever. Wow, what a great job. But in my experience, that same flavor can come through. Even as we read the text in their written form, we can have that sense that they're being spoken to us, being given, being transmitted from somebody else's heart. So there it is, the big books in a nutshell. And let's sit. David.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. It is exciting. Sorry. At least it's an excitement that this little group of people here shares. And I'm put in mind of discovering these texts for the first time as Kim held out the books. That's how I came across them, was in books. The Majjhima Nikaya landed on my doorstep I didn't know who had sent it to me. It just arrived, and I started reading into it and reading through it. And it was like entering this whole world, this whole thought world that emerges in the text. And then the texts, which I'd only heard the echoes of in Dharma talks and teachings, they started to connect up with the practice, like what was happening in the meditation. And anyway, so I share the excitement and want to make that transition from that sort of a little bit of that, excitement of discovery maybe to a little bit of meditation. We want in each of these 3 sessions to just give a little flavor of how this, taking on these texts in their physical volumes, or as we'll find out, also available online, how taking them into our practice can happen. And maybe in particular, the meditation practice, which is sort of the crucible, or the crucible and the cradle, of the practice. So if you can find yourself into a handy spot to sit and meditate for a few minutes, probably just 10 or 15 minutes, we'll do a little bit of practice with these phrases that Kim brought forward, and see how they drop into our meditation. So if you've already meditated today, as I have, or if you're sitting in a place where you typically meditate, go ahead and find your way back into your meditation, dropping in as quickly as you can back to where you left it. And if this is the first time you've sat today, just take your meditation posture, find a place of quiet and ease within, a place of balance, and bring attention inward. We've evoked the place of the heart in our practice, and as we bring our eyes down, if that's comfortable for you, closing the eyes or focusing them in the middle distance, or unfocusing them if you leave them open. Noticing a rebalancing that happens between our focus on the attractive visual world and the inner life, or the inner world, that we bring to the center, to the forefront in our meditation. letting our attention drop from the head into the heart, into the body. And the basic instructions, we say basic, but the foundational instructions of our practice, we can bring to mind, bringing our attention to the center of our lives here and letting it rest with the breath. Noticing just this in breath, just this out breath. Breathing in, bringing our attention into the middle of things, breathing out, settling our attention here in the here and now of our experience. Breathing in, breathing out, noticing the quality of the breath. What's it like right now in our experience? Maybe the breath is a little deeper, a little slower, a little shallower, a little quicker. Maybe the breath feels strong and confident. Maybe it feels a little more quivery right now. Just connecting with the breath as it is. And maybe in this meditation, we can just take the breath as it is. With the breath, it's a little easier maybe than with some of the repetitive thought patterns or some of the emotional currents that arise in the meditation. With the breath, maybe we can just let it be as it is. And don't really have to have an opinion. The breath doesn't really need our guidance. The breath doesn't really need to be one way or the other. Maybe as we connect with the breath, we can let go of our preference that things be one way or another way. And maybe we can take this attitude toward all our experience. Nothing in the meditation needs to be pushed away. Nothing needs to be pulled close. The way the practice is unfolding is the way it's supposed to unfold. You have everything you need to be more awake. You have everything needed to awaken fully. You belong here. And in the meditation, we can just accept our experience as it comes up, as it emerges and passes by. And so, just as a solid, massive rock is not moved by the wind, we can remain unmoved here in the meditation by our preferences, by praise or blame. As a solid, massive rock is not moved by the wind, so a sage is unmoved by praise or blame. The meditation provides an opportunity to let go. It's a way of simplifying our experience by not adding to it and by letting go of the things that have been added to it. We can connect with the breathing and take note of how the breathing is in and of itself simple and clear. And the breathing can be known by a knowing, an effortless knowing that likewise is simple and clear. Maybe on the surface of the meditation, there's turbulence that comes and goes. But in the center of things, when we connect with the breath, our experience can be clear, undisturbed. The winds of praise and blame and preference and opinion, while they may ruffle the surface, don't have to affect the center of things, the knowing of the breathing as it happens. Just as a deep lake, deep in the lake is clear and undisturbed, so our experience becomes clear upon hearing the Dharma. As a deep lake in its depths is clear, undisturbed, cool, at ease, at rest, at peace. So in our practice, we become clear as we connect with the teachings. Touching in with our direct experience of this moment. Just the simple sensations of experience, maybe of the breathing. We're in direct connection with the Dharma. A simple, clear knowing of the way things are right now. As a deep lake is clear and undisturbed, so a sage becomes clear upon hearing the Dharma.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Kim. I just want to take a pause for you to take in this as we transition to a different form again to engage with our practice and learning. And so David offered a way for us to practice with Dhammapada verses. And so, what did you discover in that process? And what effect did it have? And so be curious about this. And so I wanted to open up for us to have a chance to ask additional questions or needed some help to elaborate something that's being offered today so far. The structure of the Pali Canon and the books that Kim have shared. So Nancy, thank you for getting going with this.
Okay. Hi, thank you for offering this class. Is the volume okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I have a question about where a certain sutra that I know about fits in. I'm curious about the Diamond Sutra and the teachings of Nagarjuna. Do they figure in here or are those later commentaries?
They are later.
Oh, they're later, okay.
Yes, the Diamond Sutra is one of the main Mahayana later evolvement, later sutras. They are actually called sutras.
Yeah.
And so, so this is a later creation or later evolvement. And the Diamond Sutra is in the Mahayana tradition, and my understanding. And you said that there was another one you said that you were...
Well, just a question that pops to mind based on your response is very basic, but what is the difference between suttas and sutras? And how do you know when you hear about something, if it's part of the canon of original teachings or if it's commentary that came later? Do you know that from the title of it? Or do you just, there's some other way to know that?
Yeah, it's a harder, and it's quite an extensive question. And I see Diana unmuted. Why don't I invite Diana to come in?
Ying, is there something you want to say? I don't want to use.
Go ahead, please go ahead. Yeah.
I'll say a few things. First, the difference between sutra and sutta. Sutra is a word in Sanskrit. The same word in Pali is sutta. So the same word, two different languages. Sutra is Sanskrit, sutta is Pali. So what's preserved in Pali is, of course, in the Pali Canon, hence its name. The sutra is Sanskrit, which comes from later teachings, and we wouldn't necessarily call them commentarial. Commentarial for the Pali Canon is still in Pali, but an interesting thing about the Mahayana is they have a different canon. So they acknowledge the Pali Canon, that it being early teachings, but they have a greater extensive canon and their canon isn't closed, whereas the Pali Canon is closed. The Mahayana one isn't, and it includes, the Lotus Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra, all these types of things that are very well known in later Buddhism. So they're just different canons, and maybe that's helpful to say. I don't know, is that helpful, Nancy? Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just add a little bit in terms of what Diana said, that there are, even in the Pali Canon, you will see, and maybe later on we will share a little bit about this, and there are parallels of the of the Pali Canon, and in the Chinese, there is a Chinese translation, and there's a Chinese collection called Agama, and that is based on the Sanskrit, and that's my understanding. And so there, it's quite, and it's not always easy to tell which one is early, and there's certain things that the scholars have some assessment and some degrees of a confidence based on textual analysis to assess, but also, there are a lot of this that are not completely certain in terms of early and late. Certain things are quite clear, kind of what Diana was saying, and the Diamond Sutra, and those are later. Yeah. Does that help, Nancy?
Yeah, thank you. I have more questions, but I'll wait. I'm sure others have questions.
You make it to Kim unmuted. Why don't we have Kim?
Yeah, I can add just a little bit, because this is a great question. First of all, let me just frame a little bit by saying that in later classes, we're going to talk about the history, the preservation of the Pali Canon in particular, but that relates to all the other Buddhist literature also. So we may get to some of this if it's possible to kind of just hang with this for a little while as we go on. Somebody did ask in the chat, what is closed? It means nothing can be added to it. The texts are closed. This is, this is what we have. It will be preserved as well as possible throughout time. But there came a point where there was an agreement in the existing Buddhist community that we wouldn't add anything more. And there are lots of other texts after that, but they're part of the Mahayana and other things. And so also to just say for context, we don't want to give the impression that what we're showing with these books is like exactly the original teachings of the Buddha. We don't know that. And also there were many, many early schools. And so what we have are the Theravada texts. That was one of the early schools out of as many as, 24 or 16, I forget, some large number. So there were other versions of these texts that were not Theravadan, they were Sarvastivadin, they were various other things. And those have been lost. If they had written canons, we don't have all of those. So we have just one version, but it points pretty far back. And we also know that there were some teachings in Gandhari and other languages that could have been around the same time. They were transmitted across India in some different way. Again, we don't have complete versions. So we like the Pali Canon because it's actually a complete set, and it still has a Vinaya with it. It's preserved a monastic discipline all these years. So in a sense, we have the one that made it through, and that's good enough for me, but just to be aware of that. So maybe we'll stop there. There's a lot here, but later classes should address it too.
Yeah. And there is a question in the chat. They all point to the same thing. And I see David unmuted. You want to say something?
Yeah, three things. One is I saw the chat and appreciate the guidance on how to pronounce Mariah's name. I took a gamble and I lost, but I did see that in the chat. Yeah, I would just, I like Nancy's question is interesting. How can we tell the difference? I mean, you can know something about it, and that's sort of where these answers have gone. You'll also find that there's different feel and characteristics. I mean, a lot of the later literature tends to be more literary. It doesn't have the oral feeling that these texts do. It's not filled with the same sort of mnemonic devices and repetitions that were part of an oral teaching tradition. So there are things like that, and we'll probably mention some of those. But and then I was going to say something about don't they all go to the same place? I don't know if that's the case, I guess, but it's interesting in a lot of the later literature, the Mahayana literature, the Tibetan literature, you can see the early teachings. You can see the Pali Canon, the imprint, the echo. whether it's the way teachings are divided or the way the meditation practice is put forward. And a lot of times you'll see implications or suggestions of the early literature, the early texts, sort of further developed. So there is a way in which they're related. They come from the same place, even if maybe they don't always point to the same place in the same way. That would be an extreme view. But there is they do hang together in an important way.
Yeah, I use an example because I used this last week's IMC teaching, that in Diamond Sutra there was one very famous line that all conditioned things are like illusion or dewdrops in the flashing light. And I was actually teaching the similes of 5 aggregates. I thought, wow, don't they connect so well based on just, Buddha's similes that we know in the Pali Canon about 5 aggregates. And then that was such a kind of resonance in what David just shared. You can kind of find some ways that they're connecting in different ways. Yeah. So thank you for the rich questions. And I'm gonna turn it to Diana to close us off for this first class.
Thank you, Ying, and thank you, Nancy, for your question, and David and Kim for weighing in. And maybe I should apologize by saying some kind of like language that got set us off on this. You can hear a little bit my bias showing in about the Pali Canon, so I apologize for that. I don't know. I feel excited about continuing on this journey with you all, and you will receive an email after this class that will have a link to a Google folder that will have documents in it, including the one that Kim showed today. And there's also, I'm thinking like right now, like, oh, maybe I'll modify a document in there. So yeah, well, so I'm saying this to think that it might get added to as we go on. There's some initial documents in there we might be adding to it as the course goes on. So you'll get access to that, including a link to the recording of this if you want to listen to some of this afterwards. But maybe I'll just offer us some homework. If you have any of these books that Kim pointed to, just open it up and look at, I don't know, flip through it, read anything that seems interesting that the eye lands on. Just, look at it, and maybe you'll read it and go, this is weird, or that I don't get it, or you're like, or maybe it's like, wow, this is so great. This is why I got this book. It's so beautiful, inspiring. Just make room for whatever reactions you might have. There is such, as Kim pointed out, there's such a breadth of the type of material in the Pali Canon. It's amazing what's in there. Some of it I just love, so it's like touches my heart deeply, and some of it I'm kind of like left scratching my head like, what? So I just want to just point that out, that there's such a variety, a rich variety in there. But if you have a book, just open it up and see where the eye lands on, and just notice your reaction. We don't have to like everything. We don't have to agree with everything. We don't have to approve of everything, but just to start having a relationship with some of these texts. If you don't have a book, that's perfectly fine too. We'll give some hands-on guidance on how to find some of these online. So how to find these books, including like specific things that you're looking to, as well as if you want to just kind of like browse around. That's some of that what we'll be exploring in the next 2 classes. And then do any of my co-teachers have something that they would like to add?
I just say Barbara has a question in the text message about why do you find the 5 aggregates? And so this might be an experiment, a homework to explore. This is in Samyutta Nikaya. There's a whole book on 5 aggregates. So Samyutta Nikaya number 22. And so you might, be curious to look it up and to take a little look at some text regarding 5 aggregates. Yeah.
And we'll incorporate it on Thursday. Just making this up right now. We'll Thursday and Friday between David, myself, this person, and Diana. We'll make finding something about the 5 aggregates part of how we explore how to look at some of the online resources. So.
And Kim put in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry. Kim, do you want to say what Kanda means and Samyutta means?
Kanda means aggregate. It's the Pali word for aggregate.
And Samyutta is like the word for like the collection or something. So it's that collection of discourses, the Kanda and the Kanda.
Yeah, remember this one is about topics, right? So there's a whole one on the topic of the aggregates. Of course, the aggregates are found in all the Samyuttas, but all the Nikayas. But anyway, the topic of the aggregates.
Okay. Well, thank you all. And we'll see you on Thursday, just day after tomorrow. And if you'd like to unmute, we can all say goodbye together. So bye-bye. And thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
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 See you soon.